In a big twist of events, Hard Eyes, my favorite film of 2025 so far. Who saw that coming? Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. I have a new camera set up and a new microphone set up, so we'll see how this goes. And yes, today we are talking about Hard Eyes. I talked about this in a couple other videos, but this is a movie that on the one hand I was really intrigued about when I saw the previews for it, just because I'm a slasher girly. I love my slasher films. I know I come on here all the time and harp on how these movies have terrible storylines and bad themes and all of this stuff. But you know what? I can forgive that as long as you're giving me a good time. And I feel like with slasher films, like Friday the 13th, for example, which Hard Eyes is definitely borrowing very heavily from. Those films, obviously not cinematic masterpieces, but they're a lot of fun. And I know that some people sometimes look down on those movies for just being a Halloween ripoff, and sure, they are. But I've always defended Friday the 13th as being a series that knows exactly what it is and just wants you as the audience to have a good time when you're watching the films. And that's what I was really hoping was going to happen with Hard Eyes. And this is a movie that I feel like everyone in my life, from my friends to the students in my undergraduate film classes, were all saying how stupid this movie looked, which I could understand from the trailer. But there was also a part of me instinctually that just felt like Hard Eyes was going to be a bit of a surprise. There was a part of me that just felt like this was a movie that knew exactly what it was, and I'm very happy to say that that is exactly what Hard Eyes turned out to be. From the very opening sequence, it had me hooked. I love the way that it starts out and it's playing this country love song. I've heard that song before. I don't remember the name of it, but growing up in a household that listened to country music nonstop, I know that's like a staple love song within that genre of music. It was literally the first seconds of hearing the notes of that song where I was like, okay, I think we're in good hands here. And then it just starts off with this proposal that's supposed to be very romantic in this very aesthetically pleasing location. While it is a real proposal, this whole like setup has been constructed by the boyfriend and girlfriend for them to capture this moment on camera and for it to be this like big viral moment for them. And it's very funny because you have the boyfriend that is like messing up and not doing things right, and then the girlfriend is scolding him. You have moments where she's like mouthing the words that he's saying to her along with him. It's very funny and very much commenting on our current state of society, in which a lot of times these genuine connections that we have with either loved ones or family or friends tends to get replaced by these very artificial constructed moments to make our lives seem way more perfect than they actually are. Already I was like, okay, you've got the comedy, you've got the social commentary in there, and then the sequence ends with some really great slasher film kills that are super gory and a lot of fun. And so immediately this film was just like checking off all of the boxes. I was like, yes, finally a fun movie that is actually trying to say something as well. I just feel like, especially in the last few years with our whole elevated horror trend, sometimes those movies can just feel so serious. And I'm like, can we just like laugh and have a good time every once in a while? I feel like the horror films that I love growing up all had like these moments of humor and joy and happiness in them. Like the fear of death, it just doesn't hit quite the same way when you just have a bunch of characters standing around and acting depressed and actively wanting to die. I'm very happy that Hard Eyes had a playful tone to it. It did not take itself too seriously. Is it a perfect movie by any means? No, of course not. Like every film, there are like things that you can nitpick about it. I will say, well, I think it does balance the romantic comedy tropes with the slasher tropes really well. As is the case with a lot of horror comedies, usually you have an emphasis on one genre over the other. And I would say that Hard Eyes is definitely leaning more into the comedy and the romantic parts of the film rather than a slasher film. I feel like a movie like Friday the 13th does have more kills in it than this film does. So if you're going into it wanting more of a slasher film with maybe a little comedy sprinkled in, you might find this film a bit annoying just because there are sequences where it can focus more on the relationships between the characters, and sometimes you won't see the killer for like 20 minutes. And I will say, while I do feel like overall the film had a very good pace to it, there were a couple moments, I'm specifically thinking around like the 20-minute, 30-minute mark, where it was definitely leaning more into being a romantic comedy parody, focusing a lot on the meet cute between the protagonists. That felt like it went on for a while, and I do remember being in the theater thinking like, when are we gonna have a kill happen? For that reason, I don't think this will necessarily be a film for everybody. I could see the majority of people enjoying this, but I do think your enjoyment of it is going to depend on what you want out of it. I do think it has definitely more of that slasher element by the third act of the film, but you do have to get through the kind of Hallmarky stuff before you get there. And if you're just not a fan of this kind of comedy or horror comedies in general, you may find some of the humor in here annoying. I personally really enjoyed it. I thought this movie was hilarious. My friend that I saw it with loved it as well, and they were one of these people going into it being like, this movie's gonna be so stupid, why are you dragging me to see this? And then by the end of it, they loved it. It's like their favorite film of the year so far as well. And I think the film does a really great job with the comedy and again balancing it with the more horror elements. In lesser hands, this film would have been a disaster. In lesser hands, it would have been really easy for this film to go into the territory of something like a scary movie. No shade to the Wayans brothers, I can enjoy those movies when I'm in the mood for them. And while Hard Eyes definitely does have those aspects to it, it's not completely going over into parody. It is definitely making fun of the tropes and definitely winking at you as the audience. I do think it has a lot of heart to it, and I do think it has a lot of sincerity to it. And I think that's why I was able to enjoy the more comedic aspects of it. I felt like the filmmakers were making fun of these tropes, but it was coming from a place of genuine love and enjoyment of the tropes. The humor felt very on par with something like an Edgar Wright movie, like a Shaun of the Dead type situation. So if you're a fan of those movies, then I think you would definitely enjoy Hard Eyes. So again, I think the comedy is very well paced and it's well balanced. It plays a lot with that type of humor where something's happening on screen and then you can hear things happening off screen. And a lot of the humor is coming from the juxtaposition of what's being said off screen versus what we're seeing on screen. And what I like too about this movie, going into it, I was like, one thing that would really make this film stand out is if it can balance the negative feelings that people have about the Valentine's Day holiday. And again, a lot of that goes back to the consumerism aspect of it. A lot of that goes to the artificial aspect of it, the pressures that can come with it as well. I know people that are in relationships and it doesn't matter if their partner does nice things for them throughout the year. If they don't do something special on Valentine's Day, good luck to that person, right? It usually ends up in some argument, which is silly because it's like, why do we put so much emphasis and pressure on this one day? And again, it all goes back to the consumerism and what we're sold and marketed to. So I was like, if the film can manage to balance the negative feelings about Valentine's Day and feelings that I feel like are very valid with the genuine human desire to feel love and connection with someone and to genuinely celebrate love. The feeling of love itself is something that should be celebrated, not whatever Hallmark greeting cards market to us as love. So I was like, if the film can figure out a way to balance these two aspects, then I think it would be really great. And I do think Hard Eyes does that well. You definitely have moments of characters commenting on the holiday and how much it sucks. But then within the two protagonists that you have, this couple who are not a couple at the beginning, but they go through the whole romantic comedy journey, and they both have these kind of skewed ideas about love and what they're looking for. And so it's them kind of going through this journey of discovering what true connection with another human being is and what that feels like. And again, I feel like doing it in a very genuine way. I feel like if this movie was to just go completely to the side of cynicism, I don't think it would have been as enjoyable. And maybe that's like the romantic in me that's talking. I love my slasher films, but I have a huge spot for the classic Hollywood love stories. I guess I enjoyed seeing that aspect being brought into a film like this. And speaking of Hallmark, I feel like this film does the Hallmark movie tropes so beautifully. I mean, just like it hits the nail on the head. And again, does it in a way where it's funny, it's winking at you as the audience, but it's not completely over the top parody either. And I think that's the kind of comedy that I like. I like the more subtle hints of comedy, not so much the like over the top slapstick that you do get with things like a scary movie, but everything from like the meet cute to the best friend of the female protagonist that's always making wisecracking comments. And in a really bad Hallmark movie, this character would be like the most annoying out of all of them. But in Hard Eyes, this is like one of the best characters and they're actually really funny and they actually have really smart dialogue. And I just love the way that the film is able to meld the typical scenes that we get in a romantic comedy with those that we see in a slasher film. Everything from having a moment where the characters are looking lovingly into each other's eyes, and they're having that realization that maybe they've finally found that person that they're looking for, and their faces are getting closer and they're going in for the kiss. This is all happening in the foreground. Meanwhile, in the background, you have the slasher villain that's walking over to them, that has the huge like butcher knife and getting ready to kill them, and them just being like, oh no, okay, we gotta go now. Or you have like this other moment where you'll have characters that are having this very deep conversation to each other and revealing things about each other, and they're coming to the realization about how their past trauma has impacted how they think about love. Meanwhile, in the background, you can hear the stereotypical slasher couple having sex in a van, and of course, as any good slasher film, the killer finds them and kills them brutally, while again, in the same scene, you have these two lovebirds that are having this very deep personal conversation with each other. It works so well. It is so funny. Comedy and horror, I feel like, are two very difficult genres in their own right, because again, you just kind of have to hit those beats. So huge kudos to Josh Rubin and the filmmakers of Hard Eyes for being able to weave all of this together very seamlessly. And I love that we have scenes where the music will come in and it will be that very syrupy, romantic soundtrack, and then just like immediately will go into a slasher film soundtrack. I feel like in a lesser film, again, you would have had like these kind of clunky moments where it's like, okay, we're gonna be a romance film, now we're gonna be a horror film, now we're gonna be romance, now we're gonna be horror. And again, here it's just like blended together so beautifully. I thought the actors in this film were great. I really loved Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding as our primary protagonists and as this couple that's supposed to be falling in love with each other. I thought they had really great chemistry together, very great comedic timing. It was also fun to see people like Devon Sawa pop up. I had no idea he was going to be in this movie making a cameo, but he plays the like typical slasher film detective cop. He's hilarious. He's one of the highlights of this film. You have Jordana Brewster in here, who's also playing a detective who is always on her phone looking for Tinder dates. They're hilarious together. And yeah, overall, this is just a really fun movie. Like, if I had to nitpick and give criticisms to some things, like I said, there was that moment within like the first 30 minutes where it felt like the narrative dragged a little bit. I do feel like it picked up by the second and third act. I do feel like the reveal of the killer was a bit obvious. Not saying that because it's like, oh, I'm so smart, I was able to figure it out. It was more so just in the fact that you'll have scenes where a random character will pop up and they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. If I had to guess, that's probably the killer right there. It was a bit obvious. I don't think it really negates from the rest of the film, because again, I don't think this film is necessarily interested in creating a mystery around the killer. I think it is more interested in how it can play with genre. And I think it's definitely more interested in the development of the relationship between the two characters. I do wish the film had maybe a stronger aesthetic to it. Visually, it looks fine. There are some really great set pieces throughout the movie. I really loved, again, that opening that's taking place in this like farmland. I love the scene where you can see it in the trailer where they're on the merry-go-round. I thought that was really cool. And I really loved the whole sequence of them at the drive-in theater with people watching, I think it's His Girl Friday. That really led to some really great moments of, again, combining the romantic comedy with the horror. So it looked fine. It's not a film where I'm like, oh my god, look at the aesthetics of it. Visually, it kind of felt like a early 2000s film almost. And I kind of wish it would have leaned a little bit into that grainier look that we are accustomed to in slasher films. I mean, I say all the time that like I'm really tired of people relying on 80s and 70s aesthetics, but that's more so because I feel like a lot of films lean on the aesthetic and kind of hope that the aesthetic will be enough to pull the film along rather than focusing on the narrative and the characters. Whereas I feel like this film had really great narrative and characters. And again, it's not like the aesthetics were bad. It's definitely playing with the typical Valentine's Day colors of reds and pinks and purples. So this is like a super nitpick on my part, but maybe slightly like stronger visuals, aesthetics would have been nice. So those are my overall thoughts on Hard Eyes. Again, I just had a really great time at this film. Again, it's not a scary movie by any means. I feel like I'm still waiting for that great slasher film that is genuinely creepy in the vein of something like a Halloween. And really, I'm just kind of waiting for the first really great, eerie film of 2025. I feel like so far we've been getting films that are not really that scary or just leaning more into comedy, right? We had that with Companion last week. It looks like we're going to be getting that with The Monkey in a couple of weeks as well, which makes sense because I think given the heaviness around the world right now and just what's happening on the world stage. I think it's okay that we're having films that want to lean a little bit more into the comedy and joy. I feel like that's kind of what we need right now as an audience. But I am ready for a really good scary horror film. And yeah, I just feel like this really is like a Hallmark horror film. I mean, it's way better than a Hallmark movie. And frankly, I feel like as far as romantic horror comedies go, I enjoyed this way more than Companion last week, and I feel like this film really is within that specific subgenre more so than Companion was, even though Companion was definitely marketing itself as being this hybrid between the romantic comedy and the horror film. And one reason for that is because I feel like while Companion wanted to make fun of the tropes, it still leaned into those tropes at certain times in order to get the narrative from point A to point B. It just felt like it got serious in some parts. Tonally, it wasn't always consistent, whereas I feel like Hard Eyes really kept a consistent tone throughout the entire film. And again, kudos to the filmmakers for what they did here, because as I said, these genres are difficult on their own. It is not easy to blend them together. Finding that right balance of comedy and having a good narrative. It does have a thematic message that's trying to say none of this is easy. So again, kudos to the filmmakers for being able to blend everything together really well. Again, I'm sure some people are going to disagree with me on this. I'm sure for some people, they probably found the film really annoying. But if you're just looking for something that's a good time, I would definitely say check out Hard Eyes. I do think it would be a good movie for a Valentine's Day date. Did you see Hard Eyes this weekend? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next week for The Monkey. I was able to score a ticket for an early preview screening. We will see what Oz Perkins has in store for us next. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.